Lawyers for Bill Cosby, Angela Agrusa and Brian McMonagle are here now. Thank you both so much for joining me. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having us.
Brian, I'm going to ask you, you guys have argued that this is unconstitutional, what's happening to Mr. Cosby, but the DA has said this is well within the rights. Can you explain the motion for me?
Yeah, what we've witnessed over the past many months is a situation in which the media unfortunately villainized an individual, a citizen, and then the criminal justice system victimized them. In 2005, there was an exhaustive investigation into this allegation. The district attorney's office at that time looked at the accusation, turned it on its head, obtained phone records which indicated that there were 20 or more phone calls that occurred after the so-called assault occurred, found out that the initial version was inconsistent with the facts that were available, which was that there were several intimate encounters, contrary to what was originally reported. Then they found out that probably about 9 months after the so-called assault, there was a visit by the complainant to a concert Mr. Cosby was performing in, where she brought him a present and brought her parents along. After evaluating all that evidence, they came to the inescapable conclusion that there should be no charges in this case, but they did one other thing. They made a promise to Mr. Cosby and his lawyer that he would never be charged so that the complainant in the case could file a lawsuit and depose him. Well, that's exactly what happened, and in 2006, the parties, the complainant and Mr. Cosby, came to an agreement that they would walk away from all claims forever, and the case was over. Over, that is, until the Associated Press decided they didn't want it to be over. The Associated Press goes to a federal judge, somehow convinces a federal judge to unseal a deposition that the parties thought should forever remain sealed. And the next thing that happens, the same district attorney who made that promise runs for re-election, and the individual who runs against him runs on a smear campaign and vilifies Mr. Cosby and vilifies this district attorney, becomes elected, and keeps his campaign promise. We are now 12 years after this so-called assault, after this accusation, and we are now being asked to defend a case in which witnesses have died, memories have been faded and lost, evidence has been destroyed, and Mr. Cosby is now 80 years old and legally blind.
Well, Angela, I want to ask you, because we've heard this argument before, so how do you convince a judge now to dismiss this?
I'm glad you asked, because I think that's right. People think that maybe this is just a restatement of what's been previously argued, and it hasn't been. What this motion really is about is a definite principle of law that says if the prosecutor unreasonably delays in pursuing claims against a defendant, then that defendant can show why they're prejudiced. And here, this is a perfect example of how to show prejudice. We have not only an individual who had believed all of the claims against him were resolved. He was assured and he was promised that. And he sat and he watched the district attorney do nothing for almost a decade, relying on the fact that everything was resolved. So when this came to light, based on a politician's ambition, he had no reason to believe he would be subjected to this today. And what's happened in those intervening 10 years is a lot. We have seen that the district attorney now would like to bring in testimony from other potential accusers.
Well, there are 57 women who come out and say that this type of thing happened.
But they focused on 13. And if you look at the allegations of these 13, they're making allegations that today may not be corroborated because witnesses that they claim would know information are dead. We know that phone records wouldn't exist. We know that they claim that hotels were visited, and those hotels do not exist. But more importantly, Mr. Cosby is blind. He's almost 80 years old.
Why does that matter? Why does that matter?
Because
it doesn't matter to the victims, does it?
But it matters to justice. If he is there and he is entitled to confront his accuser and he can't identify them, he cannot see them today, and he certainly cannot see a photograph of them from 40, 50 years ago. His absolute right to defend himself against his accuser, which is a constitutional right, is completely obliterated. That is where the injustice is.
Brian, I want to ask you, you brought up the media. You know, I understand that from what it looks like when you say the Associated Press was involved and other people, but now you guys are on a media circuit yourselves. What are you trying to do now with even being here today?
Well, we've had time now to evaluate this case. And we've watched misinformation be placed over the airways. We've watched potential jury pools be poisoned by misinformation. And what we want people to do is hear the truth. They've never been confronted with the true facts of this case. People are unaware, for instance, that there was an exhaustive investigation in this case, that there were major inconsistencies that were developed in that investigation, that there was evidence that was obtained that led the district attorney's office that's now prosecuting them to completely come to the conclusion that this shouldn't be a prosecution. And we've asked now to come forward so we can shine a light on all of these constitutional intrusions and what we believe are violations of Mr. Cosby's civil rights.
I know a lot of the defamation is on the depositions. How do you move forward out of those when you look at those now that they're being used in court?
Well, you know, so there are two things really. You have the fact that Mr. Cosby sat for a deposition in 2005 on the promise of immunity. And we've now seen a judge rule to allow the release of depositions. And the Third Circuit, the appellate courts have said that was a very wrong ruling, but the damage has been done. And now this deposition that's out there is being widely misstated, widely misquoted by people, believing it says something it really doesn't. So when Mr. Cosby in the past has tried to defend himself, and when people who've tried to defend him have spoken up, he's been sued. People have said, it's surprising, actually, that in our society a defendant can't say I'm innocent without risk of being sued for defamation. And that's what's occurred here. So in addition to the systematic denigration of each of his rights, he's now in a place where he's been silenced, unable to defend himself. And hopefully, now that we're at a point in the litigation, both the criminal litigation and the civil litigation, where discovery has taken place, information has been produced, we can finally speak about the facts. It doesn't have to be just opinions. We can show in our motion that there are facts that absolutely demonstrate that he has fundamental rights that are being obliterated by the process.
You know, through this whole situation, we haven't heard from Bill Cosby a lot, and we haven't heard from both of you. Is there something that you both want to say before I let you go as to how he's doing or what his state is like in terms of this case?
Well, I mean, what I would tell you is first and foremost, Mr. Cosby is a father. And right now, the most important thing to him is his family. He has spoken on this case. He has answered some questions on this case. He has maintained his innocence in this case. And every time he's spoken, he's been sued. It is a tragedy that when you're accused of a crime and you try to defend yourself, you can get sued for that. But I would say that he's a strong man. He's endured the unendurable as a father. He's been through a lot of great success, and he will get through this, and we will bring him through this.
Brian McMonagle and Angela Agrusa, thank you both so much for your time. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having us.